All right. Good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and open this meeting at 6:30 p.m. Call to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll go ahead and start with roll call.
Dennis Anderson, Josh Westrich,
here.
Craig Arthur,
Present.
Sarah Ford, present. Jason Lawson,
Here.
Brian Sheward,
Here.
Corey Klossman.
Present.
All right. Moving on to Section 2, approval of the April 9th, 2018 meeting minutes. Go ahead and hear a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the April 9th, 2018 meeting minutes. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Meeting minutes approved. Are there any public requests to speak outside the agenda items? All right. Hearing none. There are no presentations and no unfinished business, so moving on to new business. We'll go ahead and hear Section A, docket PC 18012, ZA MI Homes, the Heritage Rezone. Go ahead and step forward. The petitioner can step forward. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the Plan Commission. For the record, my name is Steve Harden. I'm a partner in the law firm of Faegre Baker Daniels, and I'm pleased to be here this evening representing MI Homes. Let's see if we can. With me from MI is Mr. Keith Blaze. He's the Vice President of Land for MI Homes, and our land use consultant, Mark Leach, is also here with us. We want to thank Brittany and her team for guiding us through the process so far. We appreciate that. Very clear, transparent guidance from the town at all levels, and we really appreciate that. We're here tonight with our request for a favorable recommendation for a rezone of the property that's before you. And I'll show you here. It's a 95-acre piece of property, as you can see here on the outline, that is bounded by the Albert White Parkway on the north and Main Street on its west side. And this also kind of drills in a little bit closer for you what's near us. Walker Farms off to the west. There's a general business zoning directly across the west. The town's planned Main Street Park is across the street as well. And then Harvest Park is to our south. Back up to this. Just going to kind of walk you through some of the details of the project. The overall site design, there's approximately 33 acres of open space planned. One of the things when we had some of our pre-filing meetings talking with the town was since the town is planning to do their Main Street, your Main Street Park across the street, one of the things that came to light was that there's has been some interest possibly from the town at different times to have some physical space where maybe you might be able to display some historical items or use some other neat ideas for some additional public space. And the Giles family, who are the owners of the property, have kind of shared a lot of the history that they've had as well. So that's why the project's being named the Heritage. And so one of the things that came up from those pre-filing meetings was if the town was interested, the developer was willing to contribute approximately 7 acres that you can see on the exhibit that's up on the screen would be dedicated to the town as a town park that could then be right across the street. The existing homestead is in good shape that could be used for the town for a variety of purposes, and also so one of the barns as well. And there's a historic tree that was planted by the late Harold Giles on the property back in the mid-1950s, and we'd hope to be able to preserve that tree as part of that park as well. It also includes tree-lined streets, enhanced perimeter landscaping, and the open space that we just talked about. There's also a planned trail that we learned from the Parks Department that was something of interest. You can see across the blue line going across through there to connect an east to, helping build part of that leg of an east to west trail through that. The homes that are planned here by MI, we have 2 different types. We have single-family homes and also villa homes, which are two-family attached. What you see here is the Smart Series up on the screen. Those are expected to range from $225,000 to $300,000, with an average expected to be around $255,000. And the Villa Series, these are two-family attached. Those will each have their own fee simple lot, but they'll be attached. And those are expected to range from $215,000 to $260,000, with an average around $237,000. If the project is approved, the plan is to begin the first phase of development later this fall. And we would be happy to answer any questions that you have, but tonight we're respectfully requesting a favorable recommendation to the Town Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. All right. We'll go ahead and move to the staff report.
Staff recommends that the Plan Commission give a favorable recommendation to rezone this parcel from R1 to R3.
Thank you, Brittany. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns in regards to this agenda item from the public? Hearing none. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns from the commission?
Just to be clear, the rezone to R3 is what allows, like, the villas to be...
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Just making sure I understood that correctly.
I'm assuming we had it as R1 just to give some diversity to the area originally. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
And the homestead is, did I understand that's going to stay in place?
Thank you. I don't have a pointer, so I can't, but the homestead is in the area. You don't have a pointer. It's in where the park is, so if it's dedicated to the town, it's the town's decision. We purposely designed the project around it so that can be preserved. Yeah.
I drive by it every day. So
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah. Thank you.
Have there been any discussions from a staff perspective as to if that home would be kept or what exactly the plans would be?
So the interest of that has been primarily with Nathan and the Parks Department.
Okay.
They have talked about, they definitely do want to preserve as much as they can of it. I know that's been a huge interest and a huge focal point as people kind of drive on down Main Street. So I know Nathan's working alongside MI Homes as well as Mike Hancock with Historic Preservation to try to preserve that structure as best as they can.
Perfect. Thank you. Mike, did you want to add anything from a historic preservation perspective? I don't know. Okay.
Just that I think it's a great idea.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Alrighty, I'll go ahead and hear a motion in regards to this agenda item.
I make a motion we give a favorable recommendation to the council for docket PC 18-012-ZA MI Homes, the Heritage Rezone.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Docket PC 18-012-ZA MI Homes Heritage Rezone has been recommended to the council. Thank you. Thank you. And just for clarification, the Anson PUD ordinance amendment has been moved to next.
It's been continued to next month. And then let's see, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the meeting and just kind of go over partly one of the reasons why it got continued and just to go over requirements for public notice.
Perfect. Thank you. Alrighty. I know we have HWC present to talk about what's happening with the Legacy Core project and the thoroughfare plan. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everybody. Is the presentation after this? Did you get it on there?
I can do it or you can, but if you just scroll over, it's
Okay, great.
there.
Well, it's good to see everybody. My name's Corey Weitzel with HWC, and we've been part of the planning process on what's really been 4 planning projects that have gone on concurrently. So we've been working on the Bike Ped plan, the Legacy Core plan, the Thoroughfare plan, and then the Parks plan that was also updated concurrently with this. That has already been adopted by Council. What we wanted to do tonight was give you a brief introduction to these plans. So Without going into every detail, we could spend an hour on each one of these plans, and so we're not going to do that. We're going to go quickly through them, give you an introduction, and go from there. Really, the idea here tonight is we're kicking off the public participation process. So we want to introduce it to you, we want to go to the council and introduce it to them, and then we'd come back to you next month and ask for you to adopt this plan so that we can make each one of these 3 documents a component of the comprehensive plan by that formal action. So we're not asking for any activity from you tonight, but we would be asking for that in June. So quickly, starting with the bike ped plan. Why are we doing a bike ped plan becomes, I guess, the first question. And it's really because we've established this vision of Whitestown being one of the most walkable and bikeable communities in Indiana. And that does not just mean you build trails or you add a path along a roadway. It takes much more than that. Or it takes a full infrastructure network, which is not just paths, but it's also trailheads, it's restroom amenities, it's companies putting in showers for their employees. It's so much more in depth. But it's on the other side of that, too, it's some of the softer things. It's building a culture around walking and biking. And so this plan attacks both sides of this as it goes through the planning issues. So some of the key things we've talked about in this was the lack of regional connectivity. With the Big 4 Trail, the goal is for that to connect out. And when that happens, that will certainly address that goal. That one's well on its way. North-south connectivity was an issue. We heard from people that lived in the Legacy Core area, said we'd love to get down to the commercial district south. And then we heard from people that lived in some of the commercial areas that say we'd love to get to the Big 4. And so that connection was really important in looking at how we could do that. Safe crossings for I-65 as the community moves forward and it grows and has more development on both sides of the interstate. This becomes a key priority. Accommodating infrastructure within the Legacy Core. We also talked about gaps in the developed network. As so much is driven by developers, you can't always pick and choose where that next section is going to be put in, so you've got to constantly look, how do you close those gaps? And then this other idea of more recreational trails outside of road right-of-way. A lot of popularity of the Big 4 is you are not right along the road. So this document does a few things to help address this. The first one is establishes design standards for that pedestrian component of the right-of-way. So this is looking at more of a sidewalk situation in this table, establishing not just a minimum, but also starting to say, here's what we prefer to see. So we're pushing developers, not just holding them to a minimum, but pushing them to say, hey, we'd like to see more, but allowing it to flex based on the context that it's in. There are standards for shared use trails within this. And then the meat of it really becomes this recommended network, and that network starts to show where do we want those trails in the future. And in this, we're treating this recommended network much like you would treat a thoroughfare plan map, in that these are corridors, rights of way we want to preserve for future connectivity. That master plan also has an action plan with it to identify the short-term projects. These are things that ideally within the next 5 years, but certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, we'd like to see done as the highest priorities, and then medium, longer-term projects that are just going to take a little bit more time to get through those. So a lot more information within this plan, but it provides a short overview of what is covered here. Any questions before we jump to the next one? Yes, sir. All right. The next plan that we've been working on is the thoroughfare plan. This was actually done in context with Lebanon and Boone County both updating their thoroughfare plans at the same time. So this is done in a regional context of how does this plan fit into those areas around you. You did do an update in 2014 for your transportation plan, so this is an evolution from that. But with population growth, the number of developments that have occurred, and some of the rethinking that has occurred since then, this was just a good opportunity to refresh that, especially in context of these other plans. So the key issues that we talked about. The first one, and probably the biggest change you see in this, is this midpoint interchange. But also the 267 interchange improvements impacts it. When you add the midpoint interchange, it really impacts the dynamic, because when you look at 550 that would tie into, that's towards Main Street is a residential street. And so having to rethink the network so it can serve that midpoint interchange without dropping interstate traffic, all that interchange traffic right into someone's front yard became a key component of how we worked through this. Coordinating Ronald Reagan Parkway for the long term has been a key component of this. Thinking about the extension of 146th Street to Albert S. White and that connection through has been really important through this as well. And then it's one of those things that we don't want to overlook, which is access management. You know, as more development occurs on your key corridors, how do we keep there from being a curb cut every constant step through that process? So establishing some criteria in here for access management to give you the control to be able to say, hey, no, that doesn't make sense. So what this looks like is much like we said with trails. There's a thoroughfare plan network map. In this case, one of the things you will notice is there are actually two variations of this. They are the same, with the primary difference being how we handle Ronald Reagan in the future. Alternative A puts the current thinking for Ronald Reagan, which is that it would tie into 267 without necessarily tying into the midpoint interchange. And that's what's currently in the environmental document that's being pursued through the county. So that's why that has to be in here, because that's the current situation. But we're anticipating that's going to need a real look at that as to whether or not that's the right option. So we've recommended that area for some additional study as the plans get a little further along with the Ronald Reagan corridor, so that there is the opportunity to connect that to the midpoint interchange. And we think that has a lot of value to the community. We have updated the functional classification system maps as part of this as well, so you see that reflected here. And then standards in the sections that you would expect to find. One of the big differences between what you've done before and this is now that you have a bicycle and pedestrian plan, we're really just covering the roadway section here, the number of lanes and lane widths. We are not covering any of those pedestrian accommodations within your thoroughfare plan at this point. Those are all covered in your bike ped plan. And then we get into standards. Your nice tables of stuff are all in through here. So we've covered most of these. And again, high-level overview. Any questions about what we're getting into in this conversation? All right, we're going to push through these pretty quick then. The last thing we want to introduce you to is the Legacy Core Plan. As we go through the Legacy Core Plan, we're focusing on that original corporate limits, the traditional corporate limits of the town of Whitestown before the growth occurred. One of the key questions here is you did a downtown plan a few years ago. So why are we doing a new plan if a plan was done not too long ago? And it really has to do with the simple answer of growth. Because of the amount of growth that has occurred, it really changed the nature of the ideas that were being planned. So if you look at the last plan, it really envisioned this as a downtown district. And that becomes problematic for a few things as the community has grown so much. Number one, a lot of the civic functionality that was envisioned to be in the legacy core simply doesn't fit. Some of the rec centers that have been talked about do not fit in that downtown without completely overwhelming it. And so what we have to do is recognize that this isn't a true downtown in that we're just talking about central business district with some upstairs residential. We've got single-family houses in this district. And so we've shifted this idea of it being a downtown to this is a special use district in your community. It has historic significance. It has its significance as a central portion of that. But it really is a unique district, and that's what has led to some of that conversation as a legacy core district. The other key thing beyond population and growth and this little bit of rethinking of it is there's real momentum with the brewery. There's activity happening here, and the private sector is coming along. So again, in contrasting that to a downtown where you're using civic functionality to incentivize development, the idea here is to use developers to do most of the redevelopment, and that puts the burden off of the city and puts it onto developers to build as this goes. So guiding vision, a couple things in here. The first thing is we want to strive for unique identity, and that is by creating a mix of renewal, infill, and new construction. So one of the key things that our committee focused on in this is we don't want this just to be tearing down what's there and putting up new things. That ignores the heritage that you have there and some of the oddness of the buildings up there that are not perfect, is what creates the charm, that creates the character that will draw people to this area. So we do want to see that mix, and not just to tear something down because it's easier. We want to see those spaces preserved when it's possible. And we've given some guidance in the plan as to some of those key features that we really want to protect. We've also see this as a unique destination, not just another place in town, but really serving as a unique destination that mixes residential, that mixes retail, and some commercial business. And when you have that mix, you have the opportunity for smaller businesses to start in places where they're simply not going to be able to afford a storefront, leasing that on Whitestown Parkway. But in the legacy core, those smaller businesses, the mom and pops, have an opportunity. And then economic development, we see this as a tool to spur developer interest. Instead of the town having to build it, we see this as an opportunity that developers can drive what they want out of this, and the town can come alongside and support that, can fill in the gaps, can bridge that to get projects done. So when you look at the overall map of this, a couple things you'll immediately notice. One of them is that the development is really focused along Main Street and then along the Big Four, with a small little bit of development around the brewery. And that's purposeful because we didn't want to go into neighborhoods and start changing that character. Infill development in neighborhoods is fine, but we want to keep the houses that are there. These are people's homes, and they need to be protected and preserved. The plan then zooms into individual areas and gives some guidance as to what that redevelopment could look like. You'll see on your maps that some of the buildings are kind of a blue shade with a dashed around those. Those are envisioned as reuse of existing buildings. Where you see some of the buildings that have a darker perimeter and are white, those would be new structures in what is proposed. So, for example, at Main and Pierce, south of Pierce Street, you would see the west side mostly existing buildings to remain. On the east side, one of the proposals would be maybe those are new structures on that side. Again, this is guidance. This does not fix something to happen at any certain period of time. As you get south towards the Big Four, you start to see development orienting itself to the trail itself instead of just towards the street. And then as you get off of Main Street and you start to look at it, we see the Big Four being able to incentivize different types of development. We don't see these as large apartment complexes. We see these as townhomes, things with a couple stories to them that are appropriate within the scale. Mostly our goal within the downtown is to keep things to 2 stories into the legacy core district. Along the trail itself, there's opportunity for some linear gateways and other development. In this area, this is the area around the brewery, and the idea around the brewery is this is mostly, again, single family around it. This needs to be very appropriate scale. Most of it in this area would really need to be single story and done in a way that is compatible with that surrounding development. But there is some opportunity here for some compatible development to build on the asset that the brewery has provided. And then west of downtown, it's a lot of the same idea with townhomes, maybe a little bit more of a mixed-use opportunity as you are closer to the downtown. And then any good plan has an action plan, and each one of these has an action plan component to it, and those are identified here. Most of the actions out of this are focused on providing additional detail and guidance to issues, and not necessarily town go out and build. And so the couple things that we know we're going to need to do is address Main Street. It does need to be re-improved through that area, probably reconstructed with traditional curbs and sidewalks. And there's some other infrastructure as well, but for the most part, we're really pushing this towards the private sector. All right, so you have bedtime reading in front of you. There's all kinds of 3 reports there. Once is a lot to digest, but I think the beauty of this has been seeing all these plans together allows us to make sure they all merge together and do work together. We are taking comments. We'll be getting these up for public comment as well. If you have questions after tonight, feel free to reach out to me or to Brittany or to Dax and let one of us know. We'll be happy to sit down with you individually and work through it, talk on it over the phone or whatever we need to do. Mr. President, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you. No, I appreciate all the hard work that you guys have put into this. This is good stuff to read over, so we'll let you know.
All right, thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Alrighty. The only other business item we have are the two Plan Commission meetings that we have for June, splitting them apart due to the amount of waivers and items that are on the agenda. So what are the dates that we have proposed?
So just a few proposed dates for next month, like Craig said. We have about 10 submittals for June, and one of them has 12 waivers just by itself. So it is a pretty hefty agenda, so we thought it might be in the best interest to, instead of keeping everyone here till like 10 o'clock, to split up into two separate meetings. The first meeting would still be the June 11th meeting. We have 3 other proposed dates. If any of those work, you can let me know now or send an email. We have June 14th. This is a Thursday. Keep in mind on that one, we would have Plan Commission that Monday, Town Council that Wednesday, and then if we did another meeting, it would be that Thursday. So it could be a little bit of a busy week. We have Wednesday, June 20th. I thought Wednesday was June 20th is Wednesday, because then we have the 21st. Excuse me. Wednesday, June 20th, and Thursday, June 21st. And those would both be at 6:30 as well.
I agree that I think the having it on the 14th might be a little overkill, and being able to separate time for others to make it would be the public to make as many of them as possible would be good as well. So I propose one of the what's that? Yeah. So
If you want to email me your availability just as soon as possible, I went ahead and reserved all 3 of those days for the public hall. So I think that if I could let them know which day we will have the second meeting, it'll be best to let the schedulers know, as well as that way we can go ahead and let everyone else know, because they'll have to change their public notice.
Unless members already have a preference, which
I'm fine with either one of those dates, the 20th or the 21st.
either one in that week is good with me as well.
if there's no preference, then we should go ahead and set the time right now, and we can announce it. Or
I feel like middle of the week.
Does the Wednesday, June 20th work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Wednesday, June 20th at 6:30, we will host our other Plan Commission meeting for that month.
All right. Excellent. All right. Just last note here: we have some announcements in regards to the Historic Preservation Committee and Plan Commission joint meeting updates. I know. Did you want to give that?
I was gonna, or you can either way. I was gonna thank everyone that was able to attend. I think it was really beneficial for us to kind of walk around Legacy Core and just take a look at kind of what we already have existing, and then our goals and ideas of what we want to see around the area.
It was definitely eye-opening. I mean, being able to actually walk around and see all of the spots from an infill perspective is, you don't realize how much there actually is until you take a walk around every single block. So I appreciate you getting that together. It was definitely successful. So, and we're going to be meeting again.
Probably July. With us having 2 Plan Commission meetings next month, it might get a little bit busy. We don't want to take up too much of your time, so probably we'll shoot for a July date. I still need to talk with Dax and Historic Preservation and just figure out which night it works best, or beginning of the month, or when would be the best time to meet. But I think we'll shoot for July instead of trying to compact everything together in June.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thanks again, Brittany, and everyone. John?
members, if we could move back again regarding the June meetings. The reason that the item that was also earlier had been scheduled for a hearing tonight was the PUD amendment regarding unacquired parcels. To recall that, and Mr. Whitsett, on behalf of Tom and Carol Drake, had filed an objection to the hearing going forward tonight, and then upon review, we discovered that the the Lebanon paper had not filed or not published the notice until 3 days before tonight's hearing. And so, you know, we would not be in compliance with state law if we would have had the hearing tonight. In addition to that, he's complained, objected to the notion that interested parties did not get mail notice. And in regard to mail notice for interested parties, technically that rule only applies to rezoning cases. And this is not a rezoning as such. It is an amendment to the PUD, the answer PUD. Nevertheless, I think that Mr. Whitsitt makes some good points in regard to those who are owners of the unacquired parcels under that PUD, as well as their neighbors. And so my suggestion, members of the commission, would be that you suspend your rules and instead require the staff to notify the owners of the unacquired parcels and those within 2 parcels of those unacquired parcels. And that would just be the normal mail notice, which then would make sure that everyone who might be affected by these changes in the PUD text would be properly notified. So if members are agreeable to that, then I would recommend that you adopt that motion tonight and direct the staff to make those notices for next month's hearing.
Alrighty, I'll go ahead and make the motion to adopt and address the concerns that John has brought forward to let the owners of the unacquired parcels know ahead of time. So I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you, members of the commission. I think this would be the right way for us to go about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Alrighty, on that note, we'll go ahead and adjourn at 7:02 p.m. Thank you, everyone.